I'm Haze Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. We're at the start of the month this month, so we're going to go through the stats as well as some of the other goings-ons in the Vancouver market and touch on a couple of items. Some of them might actually be triggering for some people today, so we'll see how that goes and see what's going on with that. Without further ado, we got Peter with us from Vancouver Rent-It. How you doing, Peter? What's going on?
Good, great. Yeah, thanks for having me back for the third time, I think. Always happy to come back and do some real estate, chat about how things are going in the property management Vancouver scene.
Yeah.
And excited to we're going to talk about some of the stats and see, probably again, I'm going to assume that the prices are continuing to rise.
Wow, you must have a crystal ball, man.
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk about some other things, maybe some interesting thoughts ahead.
Yeah, maybe even some solutions or something. But yeah, let's work it out here. So, yes, you're right. Rents have gone up $25 from last month. So now we're at an average of $24,006 for Metro Vancouver. Now that's an average, of course. So this is an increase of $230 from the same time of last year, that's a substantial increase year over year. And it is of note that last year there was a $147 increase from month to month last year, whereas this year it's only $25 from last month. So not as violent as an uptick as last time, but still an uptick, and obviously year over year that's pretty heavy. This is the fifth time in a row that we've had an increase. So with interest rates being a key factor, as well as a lot of students returning, are some of the driving forces of that. Are you seeing any other things that are affecting the market?
Yeah, definitely. The last time I was on the podcast was, I think, back in the end of May sometime, and that's when we were starting to see the summer heating up, and with the summer heating up, lots of people want to move. So definitely there's the kind of seasonal aspect to it of seeing the summer come in and the prices increase. But as well, the landlord's costs have been increasing. And even though rent and mortgage prices aren't necessarily tied to each other, landlords are definitely incentivized to try and recoup some of their costs. So we've definitely been seeing, maybe across the board, if everybody raises their prices a little bit, that does, move the needle and push prices up, even if it's maybe above what the market actually is. But it's definitely something we've been seeing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think with the combination of those mortgages going up, a lot of the landlords were on variable mortgages. And for those that don't know what a variable mortgage is, it means that it does go up as the rates do, whereas a fixed term mortgage, it basically sits at that rate for usually 5 years or so. But that being said, they will have to renew at the higher levels. So these do have application to rentals, and so unfortunately they're all tied into each other, man. It's just the way it is. Now, for these averages, we use unfurnished one bedrooms as the benchmark. So basically the reason why we're doing that is, of course, that's level one, right? It wouldn't make sense to use anything higher than that. So that's these averages that we're saying when we say 2406 for an average. That's an average of a one bedroom. So obviously a two bedroom would be more, three bedroom would be more, townhouse will be more, and so on and so forth. So that's going into that. Now, today we're going to sort of deviate a little bit and discuss what would be some possible solutions, because anyone can bitch, but let's maybe do some thinking about what would be some possible solutions out there. And Peter, do you have any ideas of what would work?
For sure, and we talk about this, internally all the time. And myself, I'm a renter as well, so this obviously affects me at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, I'm an evil landlord.
Yeah,
wow.
And honestly, I mean, on a macro level, on a huge overarching level, it mostly just and there's not enough houses for them all to live in, and so you can start to talk about, which we will talk about, get into a little bit later, about what the city can, the cities do. Increase the supply of housing, and there's lots of different ways. One that comes to my mind immediately is get rid of Airbnbs, short-term rentals. There's obviously there's some buildings that ban them completely just because they don't want strangers coming in, on a daily or weekly basis. So there's certain different reasons for that. But there's also other buildings that definitely allow Airbnbs. And I think a big issue is the enforcement of it. I'm pretty sure technically in Vancouver, you need to get a business license for short-term rentals.
Not that anyone has
them. I don't think there's any sort of enforcement. I'm pretty sure in North Vancouver and West Vancouver as well, same idea. But if you go on to Airbnb, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those rentals, short-term rentals, that people don't have business licenses for. So enforcement of those, or maybe some sort of limit, could obviously bring hundreds and hundreds of more rentals, long-term rentals, to the city. That's obviously some people. Some that will obviously bother some people, and obviously the city would have to weigh the differences between the, tourism aspect. Maybe if there were fewer Airbnbs, there would be fewer tourists to the city, and it's all kind of balances out in some way. But I think that's probably a pretty immediate impact if they just immediately ban and actually enforce the ban of Airbnbs, say in downtown Vancouver. Probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those will turn into either long-term rentals or somebody else will buy them and live in them.
Yeah, which is, it's kind of interesting on a side note with the Airbnb, that because we have the looming World Cup here, and with the sheer amount of people that are coming, I don't know where they're going to put them all. We need Airbnb for sure for World Cup, because I don't think we have enough hotels to house all these people coming.
And that's what I mean about the city would have to weigh the balance and decide whether that's worth it to shut all that down, or whether they need to keep those Airbnbs for big events like that, big events and tourism, and the cruise ships coming in every day. We can see tons of cruise ships everywhere. Those people, sometimes need a place to stay at the beginning or end of a trip, and Airbnbs are obviously kind of fill that gap.
Maybe looking into the zoning would also help. I think we need the zoning to be a lot quicker. There's so much red tape, and as an empty lot just sits there just waiting and waiting and waiting, the person who owns that, or the developer who owns that in most cases, will be basically sitting there and paying for it. And of course, as that stacks up over and over and over, they're going to end up having to pass that on to the buyer. Another thing that would possibly be helpful for the situation is to add some more benefits and incentives for the rental-only buildings. Now, a lot of the problem is that I think that we're looking at supply and demand, fair enough, but we keep on always just focusing on supply and not demand. So I think that if we brought in more people to make rental-only buildings, and maybe even a city should own said rental buildings, that would bring money directly into the city, into their coffers, and then they would basically be landlords for whoever they see fit, if they want to put it to the people who need more help with paying the rent, the elderly, whatever it may be. But that would be the city's decision, and they would own that building. One of the things that would be interesting, though, is to finally see, as sure you've seen, the RTV is a little bit of the Wild West and can be a little bit crazy, as well as dealing with some stratas and stuff. And perhaps if a city owned a building, it might wake some people up to see that there's a couple of things that are a little off still in the rental market as a whole.
For sure.
So, there's no silver bullet, but at least he's a couple ideas. I'm sure that from people hearing our ideas, they're just going to be triggered and yell at us and whatnot.
I think something else that I've talked to a couple of builders and stuff like that the cost of materials obviously has gone up significantly. Even just in the last 2 or 3 years. And one of the main problems is that there's not really any developers that are building non-luxury condos. They're just building only luxury, quote unquote luxury condos, just because, if it costs, 90% of the cost of building a luxury condo or building a non-luxury condo, and you only have to an extra 10% just to make it luxury, and that you can sell it for a huge, much bigger margin, then it makes way more sense to do that. So, of all the new pre-sales and stuff like that coming up, I don't think you're seeing anything that is targeting a lower budget necessarily. It obviously depends on the area, but I think in general, the term luxury is thrown out there, and the prices of those condos follow. And when the prices are so high, then people either can't afford them, or when they do afford them, then they need or put the rent up super high to justify the mortgage payments, and it just keeps kind of spiraling from there. So I think there's not, like you said, it's not one silver bullet. It's a ton of different things compounding on each other, and Vancouver's kind of just turned into the perfect storm
perfect mess. You mean
mess for rent prices to continue to climb. Obviously out of many people's budgets.
Oh, absolutely. And most people are now having to move east. It's just how it is. Whether it be east, like to Langley, or east to Winnipeg.
Yeah.
There's definitely a drain going out of the city right now.
For sure, yeah. It used to be back in the day. My parents were from Ontario and moved out here when they were, in their 20s, and I think a lot of people my age, their parents did the same thing.
Yeah.
And then nowadays, it's all the young people who were born there. A lot of them are moving elsewhere because living in downtown Vancouver or some of the surrounding, Metro Vancouver area, it just isn't affordable anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's one of the things too, kind of pull back the veil. And as I said at the top of the show, that we may be triggering some people, but we hear a lot of the stories of the greedy landlord. And admittedly, there's tough landlords and tough tenants on both sides. That's fine. And we're not going to get into that. But just to expose some of the numbers, and that, as I'd mentioned earlier, that the variable mortgages have gone up 312% since January of 2022, and the fixed terms ones have gone up 155% during the same time. So this obviously will get passed on to the tenants, in between the tenants there. And of course, the maximum rental increase was 2%. So
low.
These numbers are well off. I know of one landlord in particular that had called me and said, "What do I do?" Their mortgage jumped from $1,200 and change up to $1,900 and change overnight. So that's a huge hop for somebody to handle. I mean, they're fine and able to handle it, luckily, but I mean, there are certain people who can't, and certain homeowners who aren't landlords who may have trouble coming up. So we might be looking at some questionable times in that. And of course, you always hear the retort a lot of times, usually in anger, holding the breath and stamping their feet about, if they can't afford it, just sell it. That's a fine idea. However, then we have less inventory again, which leads right back to what we were talking about.
Exactly. And also, so if the tenant lives there right now and, maybe they're paying, X amount of dollars, and the landlord's mortgage jumps up by a huge amount and the landlord's forced to sell, well, now the tenant has to move anyways. And now if say they've been there for a couple of years, now they're looking at having to move into a place for a huge rent amount. So just because the rent can't increase during the tenancy, the second the landlord has to sell, and maybe they're forced to sell because of the mortgage rates, the second they have to sell, then now the tenant has to leave anyways, and now they're thrown back into the market that maybe they haven't been in a couple of years, and they're still subject to the same rent increase. So it really from both sides, it's not ideal.
Yeah, and this is also where some people claim for wanting rent control, which in a small level sort of makes sense. That way the rents can't go up astronomically. That being said, of course, when it's being dealt with, well, any landlords, whether it be private or professional type of deal, if they're restricted to X amount, max amount, that's it, why would they update anything? Do you know what I mean? So if the fridge breaks down, they're just going to go get a used, seafoam green one from probably when your parents moved out here, throw that in. And, this is a good way to end up with a bunch of terrible slum projects almost, you know what I mean? So there is plus and minus to rent control. And I don't think that is the greatest idea, to be perfectly honest. Mm-hmm. I think we need a better solution other than just straight rent control. Because as we've seen for multiple other things, when our government gets involved in stuff, it usually doesn't turn out well.
Not necessarily, exactly. So something else that I was thinking when you asked me to come on the podcast and asked me to kind of brainstorm some ideas for things, and I was thinking that, personally I use Craigslist for all my advertisements, but I got a couple of phone calls the other day of people saying, oh, I'm moving from another country and I'd like to know, how the best place to find stuff is. And I said, Craigslist is a good place to start. Mm-hmm. And they said, I thought Craigslist was full of scams and all this stuff.
Yeah,
said,
fair enough.
There's definitely scams out there. But, if I was personally looking for a rental, I would first start on Craigslist. And I was thinking, I don't know if this would necessarily alleviate, the rent crisis. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking if there was one main database that everybody had to post to, and it was, I don't know if it's controlled by the government or who, I don't know who would be, creating this. But if there was one repository of all of the rentals and you could go on and it would mean that tenants were way more informed about kind of pricing and stuff like that. Because right now, there's 5 or 6 or 7 or maybe 10 different, major websites that you can go on to look for rentals. And it's kind of hard to compare the different rents in between those. It just makes it more difficult and more time consuming. Yeah. And if there was one major, website that you could go on and take a look at all the different rentals, it would just kind of remove some of the friction of renting stuff, which maybe wouldn't necessarily affect the prices, but it might make it a little more accessible for some people who were, hoping to rent a place.
Yeah, a little bit transparent. I mean, it's one of the drawbacks from doing the property management is on the sales side, we have the MLS, so you can track, what everything rented for. Whereas on the rental side, you look on Craigslist and things are listed for $3,000, but did they go for $3,000? Did they go for 22? Who knows?
Exactly. I get clients all the time who say, I took a look on Craigslist and, there's all these places on, 2 bedrooms on here for $5,000 a month. And my place must be worth this too, if they're all up there.
But they're still there.
And a lot of the time I say, well, look, this one was been up for 2 months and it was updated last night, which means they're still trying to find somebody at that price. So I said, that's definitely a factor of it, right? Like you said, on the MLS, you can actually see what things actually sold for. But rentals, there's a lot of time when I'll put something up for, maybe a little more than it's worth and have a couple showings. Then the owner will say, hey, we need to get this rented and we'll accept somebody for a lower rental rate.
Yeah.
It does make it kind of more transparency, like you said, is probably just better overall for everybody.
Yeah. And of course, bias aside, I mean, we both are at Vancouver Rent-It, but because we have so many properties in so many areas, we actually have real world ones. It also helps with the scams. I found a lot of the landlords lately have been coming to us because they sort of have a way to prove that they're legitimate, whereas sending $1,500 to some guy that you met for 15 minutes might be a little dodgy for people, or people, as you said, coming in from out of town, from wherever they're coming. They have no idea who that person is, where at least here they can look up our address and walk into our office
and see that we're a legitimate business that records podcasts and puts them on Spotify. Exactly. So, I think that definitely does make a difference, especially since even coming from Toronto, there's some people who they don't use Craigslist. Craigslist in Toronto is not popular at all. It's actually Kijiji that's the big one.
There's like a cutoff halfway through.
It's a very strange, schism. It's totally different there. They say Kijiji is the one that we always use, and Kijiji here, I never post anything to Kijiji.
I find it not very often.
No, it's not very helpful at all. So it's funny that, even, Toronto is not very different from Vancouver, but even people coming from Toronto are wary of Craigslist. So I think all of this just altogether does add more friction to the rental process, and it might not necessarily directly affect the prices going up, but I think just kind of an overall better system for renters would be more positive.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see definitely some reform on that would be definitely beneficial. You're talking about various sites as well, about Craigslist and Kijiji and whatnot. Facebook Marketplace, I don't know why, but it brings the lunacy, and I'm sure you've seen it when you post in any one of these groups that everyone has seemed to be conditioned that their opinion matters when you're just working for the landlord. So if you are actually posting up your own property, here's a pro tip for you just to save your sanity, is once you post it up into one of these groups, if you hit the 3 dots on the top right corner, you can actually turn off the comments, and it makes life a lot easier because you don't have to listen to every Tom, Dick, and Harry with their insight on what needs to happen and whatnot in the world.
Exactly. I mean, some of the sentiment, yeah, I totally agree with it. I've definitely posted properties online at the instruction of somebody that was overpriced, and I probably didn't rent it for that much. But I don't need to hear about it in the Facebook comments.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we just do what we're told. We work for the landlord.
Exactly. So, but like we were saying earlier, you don't necessarily know what the place gets rented for. Sometimes you'll put a property up for more than it's worth, and it may look, to an outside observer, oh my God, look at how high the prices are. But in reality, the prices could be a little bit lower than, if you took a look on Craigslist, the average definitely seems higher than it probably is in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So, man, we went off on a tangent there, man. It's all good. So, going on with some of the more of these stats and actually just leading straight into pricing, the price per square foot is an average across Metro Vancouver at $3.14 per square foot, with the top three being number one, Burnaby, actually at $4.26 per, Vancouver at $3.79, that's Vancouver proper, and New West has jumped up all of a sudden at $3.53 per square foot. That being said, Burnaby is probably a little bit higher right now because of all the new completions. There's a bunch of new buildings. Everyone's paid a ridiculously high amount of it, and they're trying to recoup that. A lot of people keep on pushing buying new purchases or new build as a good rental investment property. Mm-hmm. You need a lot of money down for it, man. I'm quite far off from seeing the nut being covered. The nut being covered meaning like your mortgage, strata fees, property taxes. It's not common to buy a new build and have that unless you've got a hell of a downswing. Uh-huh. So that's likely what that is pushing up Burnaby's rental prices. Uh-huh. Property prices are already up, but that's definitely what we're seeing. I would suggest is with the new builds out there. Have you been seeing these type of trends as well? Like, because you work sort of.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. The second you see all these new builds come up, people are buying them for really high prices, and they're brand new, but unfortunately for a lot of landlords, the costs just aren't being covered by the rent, even though the rent it's very high for some buildings and some places. It's still not being covered by, the rent still isn't covering all the different expenses when you factor in property tax and strata fees and mortgage payments. So it's a tough time to try and break even. But at the end of the day, landlords for the most part are going to be breaking even on their capital gains when they sell the property at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. It's not a quick money game. Contrary to these HGTV nonsense shows, where they buy something in Arizona or whatever and make $100,000 in a commercial break or whatever. That's not how it works here. Like here, the land is worth more than the unit itself, right? So,
exactly, and you have to wait for that to appreciate, and then eventually it pays off. But you might be losing a couple $100 a month, and just because the rent isn't necessarily tied to the cost there.
Yeah, absolutely, and that sort of leads into some of the investment ideas that people need to sort of focus on more. Is when you're purchasing an investment, sometimes it's better to go with an older place as long as the strata minutes read well. So make sure that you read your 2 years of strata minutes at least, so you can make sure that the building's been taken care of. Take a look at that depreciation report. Other things that you're going to want to look at when you're purchasing is its proximity to the SkyTrain. A lot of tenants don't drive. Especially in this expensive markets, they've opted to get rid of the car and use mass transit, especially if they're commuting to, as you mentioned, downtown Vancouver, which is super, super expensive. They usually will try to live near a SkyTrain line, ride the SkyTrain to downtown, not deal with parking, insurance, gas, so on and so forth, right? So there's various things that they look at, as well as I've noticed a lot of people who are investing seem to forego important things such as parking or storage lockers, and people need these. One other place that is a fairly decent investment actually is up at SFU. But that being said, though, it is very, very subject to the ebb and flow of students. Like we've talked on a couple of shows ago about the sunshine tax for downtown, SFU in particular, SFU Burnaby, because it's up on top of a mountain, right? So if you miss those students coming in September, trying to rent your place in June when there's no students, everyone's gone home and gone to wherever. It's a grind. We've had a couple of units up there, and we couldn't pay people to move into them because it's just up there. But now, of course, we've got a couple of units there. September just around the corner. Phone is ringing off the hook. So when you're looking at an investment property, you should definitely talk to your professionals, build your team, talk to your realtor, talk to your property manager. A lot of us have both licenses, and make sure that you are buying something that has a good pool, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The last thing you want to do is be, you might have the nicest unit in the world, but if nobody wants to move into it, then it's just going to sit empty, right? So
exactly.
If it's not in the right place at the right time, you can run into some serious problems. And same, out by UBC, obviously, during the summer is much harder to rent places out. But, come August and September, when everybody's moving back, those places are insanely popular and insanely competitive.
Yeah.
The only problem with some of those places out there that I've come across is that a lot of tenants don't want to stay, or they want to sublet for the summer. So that's something that some landlords either might have to concede on, or maybe leave the place empty, or if that's going to be the case, because a lot of tenants, especially international students, they want to rent the place from September to May, the end of May, but then June, July, and August, they don't really want to be there, and they also don't want to be paying rent for the place, so it's definitely a consideration.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially with subletting, there is a host of trouble that can happen with subletting, including turning it into an Airbnb, where a building starts fining every 2 weeks, $500 plus for
$1,000. Some short-term rental, $1,000 per infraction, which is not a cycle that you want to get into. It can, rack up very, very quickly.
Exactly, and the thing is that the fine goes to the owner, not to the tenant. So the tenant leaves town, starts Airbnb-ing it, the owner's racking up the fines, and if I was a tenant coming back to $10,000 worth of fines, do you think I would come back? Probably not.
Pretty tough to collect on some of those, for sure. Unless the half month's security deposit certainly wouldn't cover $10,000 of Airbnb fines.
No, not at all. That being said, we were talking about the students and stuff like that. Have you noticed a shift in people who are looking for rentals at all?
Maybe not as much as kind of to make a point about it, but we do see lots of folks from out of town in the summer, especially just because September always seems to be a real transition period. It's when a lot of jobs maybe get started. It's when school starts.
Yeah.
So we definitely do see lots of people coming from out of town, whether that be from other parts of Canada or other countries. So I've definitely seen that. Something I have seen is a lot of people trying to double up on more number of occupants in a place. The prices are getting so high that even for luxury properties, a single professional or a single professional couple, they certainly aren't being able to afford some of these more luxury properties. So I've been getting requests from tenants for, hey, there's going to be 6 of us living in this 2.5 bed, which unfortunately for most landlords, that's not going to be an ideal rental scenario. So I've definitely seen a lot more messages and inquiries that are just unsuitable just because the sheer number of people that some people need to cram into a place to make the money work.
Yeah, that being said as well, that a lot of stratas have a maximum amount of occupants per. Usually it's 4 for a 2-bedroom, because I think they're thinking about the atomic family, mom, dad, child kind of thing. That being said as well, I've been noticing lately a uptick in older people who are renting, and I've asked a couple of them who've come through our open houses and stuff like that for the rental side, and a lot of them have sold, and they're either downsizing because the children have gone off to university or whatever they're doing, or they've sold, and because the market has been going up, their buying power dropped more than they were planning on.
Yeah.
And so now they have a whack-a-dough, and they're just moving into that. Or even in some cases, I've run into people who are retiring out, and so they just downsize because, as I touched on, the house is empty nesters type of thing. They no longer need the 5-bedroom house that has no mortgage on it, so they sell it, take their $2 million or whatever, and they're just going to rent just want to hang out. They're done with mowing lawns and stuff.
Yeah, that is actually something that I have noticed. It really, I find it's obviously more dependent on the area, but for certain areas, more quieter, quiet neighborhoods, I've noticed, there are people who are, maybe above 60 or above 70 who are, like you said, looking to rent instead of stay in their current place that they're purchasing. And I find those folks are often, they've been out of the rental game for so long. Probably the last time that they were looking for rentals, they were looking in the classified ads in the newspaper, right. And they're really not used to looking through Craigslist or looking, especially not Facebook Marketplace. And some of them are definitely having a tough time kind of figuring out what what the process is and stuff like that. And as well, there's a couple people that come to mind that I showed recently that were a little picky. And I said, you're not buying the place, right? It's a little different when you're purchasing a place for $1 million, but you're just coming to live here for, it depends. It depends on how long you want to live here. And it's won't be the perfect place. But maybe those people just, didn't like what I was selling. So,
yeah, it's not even an age thing. But one of these ones that always confuses me is people will come through your showings for a 600 square foot 1-bedroom, like standard issue, smaller 1-bedroom, newer, that sort of thing. And they'll always ask you to say, "Oh, well, I don't think my king size bed is going to fit in here." And it's like, probably not in a small apartment. Like if you're moving from a basement suite in a house to an apartment, no, your king size bed probably won't fit in there. Additionally, why do you need such a big bed? Like, unless you're 6'6", are you playing baseball in there? Like, I don't understand why somebody needs such a large. But that's just my personal thing. I also deal with smaller bedrooms better because, let's face it, in the bedroom, you're probably only doing two things. One of them I can say on air, the other I can't. Sleeping, that's the one. But, I don't understand why people always want these giant beds.
I have noticed that king-size bed thing a lot, honestly. I have a queen-size bed. It works perfectly for me. And I guess having a king-size bed would be nice, but if you're renting, most bedrooms are not going to fit. If you're renting a 1 or 2 bedroom condo, most bedrooms aren't going to fit a king-size bed. So definitely an interesting consideration. Right. Yeah. Definitely didn't think we'd be talking about bed sizes necessarily on the podcast, but it is something to consider. Yeah.
Well, I just mean in furniture in general. Like your giant couch from a house probably isn't going to fit very well in a 1-bedroom, 1-and-done apartment. There's house furniture and apartment furniture.
Yeah, and you never know if you're renting. You never know when you might have to move. Right? You might have a huge bedroom right now. You've got all this huge furniture in there, and then the landlord sells it, and then now all of your rental prospects are going to be a little bit smaller, maybe. And you might have to sell all your furniture. So it is definitely something to consider for the renters out there.
Yeah, absolutely. That, as well, they can look to an older unit. Like if you look at these apartments from the 1970s and whatnot, they're huge compared to what we're doing now. Like,
oh yeah, two bedrooms. 2 bedrooms being around 1,000 square feet were pretty common. Yeah. Now a 2-bedroom for like 750 square feet I've seen, where the second bedroom is maybe big enough for a double bed or something like that. So,
on a good day.
On a good day. So definitely something to consider that. If you do have that California king-size bed, maybe look for an older building.
Right. So not surprisingly, apartments lead the way for active listings. There's currently about 79%, mostly because houses are really expensive. Like generally, I find that the houses that are being rented out have either been passed down through the family or, as we mentioned, an older person downsizing. So they just rent the house rent pays their rent type of thing, that sort of deal. So that's not surprising that apartments are there. The 1-beds take up 36% of that, and the 2-beds take up 48%. So now it's actually getting a little closer. Like a couple months ago, the 1-beds were substantially less, but it seems like it's kind of like catching up almost to an easy way. They're the most common ones, of course, simply because 3 bedrooms aren't that common, although they are starting to build them now, which is nice because I think that cities have maybe started to pressure a little bit more and saying like, hey, developers, like we got people with families here. They can't buy houses anymore. So they need apartments that will fit their family, So hopefully we see more 3-bedroom units out there. as well as I'd like to see more townhomes. Even row homes would be nice because, as we all know, anybody who lives here, that houses are expensive, whether you're renting them, buying them, whatever it may be, right? It's just the way it is. So the average rent, though, for a one-bedroom across Vancouver is $26,042. And that's with Vancouver being the most expensive city in Canada, coming in at $2,849, which is heavy, really heavy. And second place, of course, is West Van with $2,764 and North Van with $2,718. The least expensive place is Langley and Surrey, which is traditional. Generally, if you move away from Vancouver, the further east you go, the least expensive it gets. So sadly, all 5 of the Canada's most expensive cities are in BC.
Yay, top 5.
Yeah, and we've actually been the 4th consecutive month for this title, so we're definitely the champions of overpricing, I guess
so. Okay. Yeah, maybe not the title we want, but it's the title we have.
Yes. And so as another thing that sort of like was eye-opening and shocking, is poking around, looking through all our stats and stuff like that, and stopped at live.rent, which is another good source actually for rentals. I quite like that website. And on their platform, they've shown that from, I guess, asking basically, that 42% of the income goes to rent. Now, typically in Canada, people are looking for like 30%, but that is not going to fly here. What are your thoughts on this? Like when you're looking and you see like...
Definitely. I always, see you say 1/3, right? 33%.
Yeah.
It is kind of maybe what it should be.
Yeah.
But of the gross income of somebody. But what we've seen is definitely, 40% seems more realistic, especially for the rent prices right now. So I've definitely seen some owners turn people away because of they're not at that kind of golden 33% number. Or I've even seen some landlords say, hey, even the 33% is not good enough for me. I needed it to be even lower than that.
Really?
I've seen a couple of 25% with somebody that I had recently, and that's their prerogative. If that's somebody that they feel more comfortable with, then fair enough. But definitely less and less realistic that you're going to find somebody who's interested to rent if their annual income is that high so much relative to their budget.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of the thing that I find a lot of those coming in with trying to get that higher amount is from furnished units. And simply put, if you have a furnished unit, do it downtown. Trying to do a furnished unit out in, my area out in New West or Surrey or whatnot it's a little bit silly because people coming from Toronto or Montreal are coming to Vancouver to do work, not to New West, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So if you are thinking about doing a furnished unit, you're probably better off to stick as close as possible to downtown Vancouver.
Exactly. And just on the topic of furnished units, if there's anybody right now who has an unfurnished unit and they're thinking about furnishing it and they're looking for long-term tenants, please do not start furnishing it with all this furniture. It's usually not worth it. A lot of people, especially after COVID, they want their own bed. They want their own mattress. They don't want the mattress that you bought off Amazon. It's
or Craigslist.
Or Craigslist. It seems pretty well across the board that anytime I have a furnished listing, the prospective tenants come in and they say, I love the place, but I don't want any of the furniture at all. Maybe the bedside table we can keep, maybe throw in the bedside table, but everything else they usually want it unfurnished. It's not 100% of the time, but it's definitely the majority of the time if you're looking for a long-term tenant.
And that's the thing that comes up as well. You're just adding an extra moving part. So like, not only do you have these people coming in kind of being put off by a mattress that they don't know where it came from, but on top of that, you're dealing with someone else's style, like generational differences in style, cultural differences in style, male or female differences in style. Like there's so many differences here. So the likelihood that you're going to happen to nail it with whoever's coming in, like maybe not. The younger people really like IKEA. The older ones hate it.
Yeah.
Just like this. So you know what I mean? Like you just add in an extra part. So yeah, I fully agree. If you've got an unfurnished unit and you're not getting the money you want, adding furniture to try to get that money is not the best plan, and just lay up and lower the damn price.
For sure. I've even had tenants, that I've signed to a lease, and they've come in and they're moving from India, and they're either bringing furniture with them, shipping it over, or they want to purchase all new furniture. Mm-hmm. Even those folks are not interested in your IKEA mattress. So
yeah.
It's definitely something to consider. I see it all too often. People get really excited, I think, about the prospect of going to IKEA and buying a bunch of furniture for this brand new, unfurnished unit that they've just bought.
Yeah.
You get to play house a little bit and furnish it again. It may be fun, but honestly, it seems like the juice isn't usually worth the squeeze.
Yeah, absolutely not, man. So we are running a little bit low on time here. Do you have anything that you would need to add to our ponders here? Anything that's been just poking at you?
Yeah, final thoughts, honestly. If tenants are listening, then it's going to be, as the winter comes, or the fall and then the winter comes along, there's going to be some good deals out there. I currently rent a place for well under market that I got in November. I didn't have as much competition. Renting a place, although it kind of isn't great to move in November and December and January when it's not that weather's not nice out, you can get some really good deals.
Absolutely.
And landlords, you're going to have to really spruce your place up and get it ready, because it is a bit of a slower period. And if that's when your place becomes available, maybe consider doing some small renovations to kind of increase the value of your home.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, moving in the winter, I fully agree with that. And on the landlord sides of it, as you touched on, for sprucing your place up, a couple of very, very simple things for landlords to do when you're showing in the wintertime. One, if there's snow on the ground and you're renting a detached home, shovel the walk. You do not want people to break their neck on the way into the place. Ken was just going on about one of his ones. We'll get him on another show to go on about that. I'm sure he's shaking his head right now. And secondly, update your light bulbs. If you want, it's dark, it's rainy, it's gross out, make it bright inside. And when people come to take a look at your place, turn on all the lights. Even if it's daytime, just make it brighter, because they're coming in from the dark. It's gray and nasty outside and wet. And the third one is, as the temperature goes down, turn on your heat. Like, even if it's a vacant place, arrive a little bit ahead of time, turn on the heat, go get yourself a coffee or whatever, so that the place is warm, because people are already coming in. And if they're coming into a cold, dark, dank place, they're just not as attracted, and they might go to the one next door that has the heat turned on and the lights on and so on and so forth. So you want to
totally agree.
Make that inviting.
Yeah.
So, wicked. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Peter. People are trying to get a hold of you. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
You can go on to VancouverRent-It.com. Our phone number is listed on there. Email address is listed on there. But you can always reach me at peter@VancouverRent-It.com.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll have your information down below in the description as well if anyone wants to take a look there. So if you've been listening this long, thank you very much for getting to the end of our rambling podcast. We kind of just went off, and hope we didn't trigger too many people this time around. If you found anything useful, please be sure to subscribe, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a quite interesting podcast with you guys down at Citadel Law. Peter Dugan came by and taught us about what to do should things go off the rails with a tenancy, and what the best methods of action is to deal with that. So hopefully we'll see you guys next week.